Massively productive people don't work that much. That's correct, you heard me right, but let me tell you one more again. Productive people don't work that much. I've dedicated this channel to teaching people the power of productivity, but here today, I'm going to preach to you the power of doing nothing. Ain't nothing worse than the dreaded burnout. We avoid it worse than a political conversation with that one weirdo who always insists upon talking about politics even though everyone clearly doesn't want to. Yeah, I'm calling you out, Kevin. Why you gotta be like that? Burnout comes after us workhorses who don't know how to stop workhorsing, and it'll likely slap us all at some point, workhorse or not. But some of us really get slapped by it, so hard in fact that we forget how to get back up. The good news is that I'm here to give you a hand, pull you off the floor, and remind you how to counter that burnout like some sloppy hella ult. More good news, I'm gonna do this all for you just the amount of time it takes me to beat the pants off this gold ranked team in Rivals. I wanted to be the very best, like no one ever was. I was gearing up to be a creative master. I, like many of you out here, have so many interests in life. It's why this channel continues to flounder, as I'm always bouncing from one interest to the next, over to the other thing, and never really giving the algorithm any chance to figure me out. Ha! Take that. I mean, after all, there is that big problem of not having enough time in this life to do all the things in this life that I really want to do. I'm not much on traveling and seeing the world. Instead, I'd prefer to do the things that I want to do. Your neighbors talk about that trip they took to Mexico. I want to be that neighbor who talks about that cartoon he created instead. I've always said it's my goal to be the most interesting man in every room I'm in. So, what does all this mean? It means that I want to write books, make music, make cartoons, and so much more. And these are all incredible things that most people aren't even lucky enough to do once in their lifetime. Or maybe it's less a matter of luck and more a matter of a just general lack of interest in doing so. Everyone has their own wants in life. Shout out in the comments what you want out of this life and how they align with my own. But with the ideas flowing and the odds of time stacked against me, I came to one concrete decision. If I was going to commit my life to creative expression, then I just need to create things. I broke down the different working personalities in a separate video, so if you want to catch up, you should check that one out. But I define myself as a workhorse type. So when I see something I want, I dump an insane amount of hours worth of work into it. And for me, that something, as I'd mentioned earlier, was writing my own books, producing my own music, and creating cartoons. So I locked in and I figured out how to do it. 2020 to like 2021 or so was easily the busiest time of my life. My brother and I were physically building my own house with my own two hands, and I guess his two hands as well. I was writing my second and third novels respectively. I was gearing up to start Compression Man, my own cartoon here on YouTube, and I was working 65 hours a week between two different jobs. Oh, and this was all in the middle of the shutdown and all the messes that it created. It was a crazy and hectic time, to say the least, but it's something that I can still look back on and have a proud dad smile for. Again, while people tell you these fabulous stories of all these trips that they've taken, I'd tell stories about trying to put up trusses in my house in the dead of winter, letting the words flow onto the page for my books, hiring out the animation for my first cartoon, or how I maintained my sanity for doing all of this whilst working two jobs. It's all about what you want to get out of this life and what you want to be proud of. Like my workhorse mentality would dictate, I just saw all the work that I had to do, and then I got in there and I did it. And again, I did all this crap and never really had a burnout. That's right, remember the burnout? The whole thing that this video is about and what you're trying to avoid? Well, I hadn't had one, and I was doing all that. I'd somehow managed to do all this while avoiding that torrential burnout. So why then? You might ask why it wasn't until almost 3 years later that I'd eventually have my burnout, all while doing far less than I was doing here in 2021, as I've just described to you. Well, upon some reflection, and good old hindsight 2020, I think I may have finally been able to pin this sucker down. You see, now let's move on to 2023, and my life's been humming along pretty nicely, honestly. Like pushing a payload and wondering where the enemy team could be, only to realize that they're being crushed by the rest of your team back at their spawn. My house was built, and I was moved in. I'd written 3 books at the time, and even though I'd missed the book release for 2023, I was still confident in my publishing plan. Compression Man was plugging right away, it was slow, but it was coming along, and then of course there was my work. I was no longer working 65 hours a week. I'd accepted 2 promotions to my primary job at this time and was now settled back into the good old 40-hour work week. So I think we can agree that the work had leveled out by this point, but still, that dreaded burnout was stalking me like some Black Panther lurking to strike the back line. I just accepted my first major promotion, March of that year, and it was that acceptance that started the slope. The initial promotion wasn't the problem. It took the natural amount of getting used to things, as promotions normally would, but it was the eventual biting off more than what could be chewed that'd really get me. A particularly impactful development would develop around May of 2023, just 2 months after my coveted first promotion. The entire leadership of a particularly struggling team left either by force or by will, leaving me as one of the few people in the organization that had any sort of experience in that department. So, of course, I was appointed the interim manager of that team. Yay! And such was, of course, the start of my downward spiral into chaos. No one was shy of how much of a mess that chaos pit of a department was, but living in it and being the sole point of contact for that department really did do a number on me. I can remember having been there as an interim for maybe a day or two, and these people were all over me as if I should have solved years' worth of neglect in 48 hours' time. I, being the workhorse type and a responsible person, I shouldered as much of that as I could, though I'm still proud to announce that I let no one push me around or blame me for something that I had nothing to do with. Though I was also determined to leave my mark on this department and to dig it out as much as I reasonably could. And that'd be another key decision to my destruction. Weekends were really the only time calm enough to do anything in this department, so I decided to dedicate a Saturday each week to fixing a single thing one at a time in this department. One thing at a time. One Saturday at a time. I'd turn this place into a whole new functioning department in that time. And that would just be another step into the grave, as opening up even a single weekend day to them opened up the floodgates for my free time. As my name, face, and number got around, I became the single point of contact guy for every problem this old team had from this department. And even when I wasn't at work, I was taking calls, dealing with work, doing the whole thing. It was quite literally that worst case scenario that everyone dreads and talks about dreading, but I feel few people have actually experienced. At one point in time, I had a regular scheduled doctor's checkup that I completely missed because I was so wrapped up in my work, I had forgotten all about it. I can remember sitting at my desk dying of stress intake when the "sorry we missed you" text came through from my doctor's office. That was the first time I remember recognizing that there was potentially a problem here. I was not one to miss appointments of any kind, and now this job seemed to be affecting my health. Not in the literal sense like it was stabbing me in the gut or something, but I had missed a regular checkup, and that's normally something that might help me maintain my health. And then there was the vacation. I had a pre-scheduled short 3-day family vacation that summer. I was again the only leader or point of contact, still interim in that department, mind you. But nonetheless, there was no one who could cover for me. I received tons of flack and all the what the hecks for having planned a vacation in the midst of this disaster zone this department was in, and how I was somehow still responsible for pulling them out of it. So I cut my vacation a day and a half short to be able to help and better service this department and this team, and barely made it out of there on that half day as someone was just losing their mind about something and they just couldn't believe that I'd leave for vacation in their time of need. What it boiled down to was just a general, generic, toxic environment. Still yet, I took my vacation and I did my best to shove all of that out of my mind. As vacations tend to be, that one was eye-opening to just how much I was sacrificing for a job. I'd missed a doctor's appointment, allowed my vacation to be cut short, and who knows what would be next. And for what? To help a department that was a complete mess through no fault of my own? As bad as that sounds, it still wasn't even the darkest point in this journey. It still wasn't the burnout. I was still too wrapped up in work to notice that I had almost completely stopped doing anything creative at all. It wouldn't be until reflecting upon this nearly a year later that I'd finally realize when and why I'd stopped my creative work, even though in hindsight it seemed to be pretty obvious how and when it had happened. Life goes on and I wound up accepting this position as a full-time gig. I know, it sounds crazy and stupid, right? Or all of the above, right? Like walking right into the sun. But crazy is my gamer tag after all, and they did offer me some crazy money to put up with all this bull malarkey. So I said yes. Yes, sir, sign me up for another. The job was accepted and the insanity became normal for me. Nothing ever slowed down or normaled in the real sense, not for a year or so at least, But the dumbness of it all had kind of become numb to me, I guess. It had become normal, and it wasn't until the most random and trivial of days that I would finally hit rock bottom. It was a Wednesday I'd never forget. I had to take a 4-hour class that was required of my employment. 4 hours, that's half my shift, away from the office. That'd be sweet, right? Wrong. And I know you might be laughing at me because you know just how wrong I am. I grabbed lunch on the way back from the office after that 4-hour class and stepped back in. Instead of 4 hours refreshed from having been away, I was 4 hours deep into problems and behind any resemblance of a schedule because I had been gone. I can remember sitting down and just shutting down mentally. Still to this day, I assume it was some sort of self-defense mechanism my mind must have done. But I was just so bombarded with problems, questions, and nonsense that my mind just turned off. And in that moment, I adored that feature. My problems were gone. I was no longer thinking, and I could just live in the bliss for however long I needed to. Except, of course, it was not that simple. Nothing ever is. My mind shut off didn't have a clear off switch, or perhaps to speak it in better terms, I didn't know how to turn my mind back on again. What preceded was a 72-hour stretch of my mind being turned off, me not having motivation enough to eat food, much less to create the things I'd grown to adore in this life. It was like watching myself play a game that I literally couldn't play. All I could do each day was wake up, force a morning routine, act like I was at work, drive home, go to bed. I kid you not, I drove home and went to bed, slept for over 12 hours, woke up, forced a morning routine, and pretended like I was at work, only to go home and go back to bed. I can remember the feeling of actively not being motivated to do any of the things that I loved being the biggest dreaded feeling of this phantom state I'd found myself in. On the 4th day, I guess I had finally overdosed on sleep as I couldn't bring myself to go home and go straight to bed again, though I still was not motivated to do much of anything else. I fired up my Xbox and partied up with an old buddy of mine. I can remember reciting to him what my week had been like. I spoke it as though it was just another routine week for me, as if there was nothing crazy or weird going on. I really didn't feel like I was unpacking any sort of problem onto somebody. I can remember my friend's worried reaction to my description of my last 3 days. He quite literally said that it sounds like I was in some sort of deep depression, and he expressed actual concern for me. Thank goodness for that, as it triggered me to finally look at myself. His worry had worried me. Was there something for me to worry about in my 3-day stretch of autopilot? Spoiler alert, the answer is yes, and it was that realization that helped me drag myself out of that depression. I'd say it wasn't until like a week after that 4th day that I'd fully climbed out of that pit, but I climbed out of it with some healthy hindsight. You see, it all begins with the weekends for me. Looking back at time in 2021 when I was building a house, writing a book, starting a cartoon, and working 2 jobs, I still had weekends off. And it's not so much about them being weekends as much as it's about just having consistent days off and time to reset. Once I dedicated a Saturday a week to fixing this department, I'd open myself up for no longer having a reset time. Add the fact that I was also being bombarded by phone calls on Sundays and on evenings, there was no escape. There was no reset. And the lack of that reset just gradually ate away at me like some TikTok meme replaying itself into oblivion. Eventually boiling over to a breaking point where my mind took over and just shut itself down and said, nope, we're not going to do this anymore. And that's what brings us around to productive people working less. We know how to work breaks and rests into our schedule because we need to. I now shut my work phone off whenever I'm not at work, and I fully reset every weekend. I even go so far as to take consistent time off every 6 months in order to give myself an even harder reset. It's these intentional and needed breaks and resets that avoid the dreaded burnout, because a work burnout will even affect your creative work. It derailed mine, and I've always been more productive in my creative work than I ever am at my job. But that work burnout shut down my whole creative factory. We need a source of income to create the things we love, and we should respect our jobs for being that, but we should never let our jobs own us. No matter how lucrative the paycheck, we have to take care of ourselves. I have a video on how to take better control of your working life and better understand the kind of worker that you are. That'll be on the end screen here. Otherwise, go out there, take control of your time, schedule resets, and stick to them. Avoid that darn burnout. My books are available on Amazon, links in the bio. If you were to check one out, I'd be forever grateful. I suggest starting with Dusty Little Wastelanders or anything published after that, as those feature some of my strongest writing. If you're still struggling with your work-life balance, then I suggest checking out the video on my end screen, as it's a good way to remedy that mess. Now, go out there and start some changes, bud.